All right, we'll go ahead and get started here. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the fourth webinar of our Trucking Mastery webinar series. I want to thank both Truckstop and Let's Truck for putting this on. Today, we're going to be going over using data to your advantage. We have on the call Brent Hutto, Senior Advisor from Truckstop. And we also have, of course, the one and only Kevin Rutherford, founder of Let's Truck. Gentlemen, thank you for both being here. Really appreciate your time. Excited to dive in.
All right,
Yeah,
great
well, thanks
to
a
be
lot.
here. I think
Yeah, thanks, Nate.
you forgot the Your Highness part.
I did. I left that out, but we all know that already.
Okay.
All
All
right.
right.
All right. Well, thanks, Nate. I appreciate it. This webinar series, Kevin, is something that you and I talked about for a long time. We love continue to talk about education and to kind of encapsulate these things into six big topics. And then the first one was the big picture, that sort of thing. And then the second one was the pathway to independence. And then the third one was how to survive your first year. Now I'm really excited about this one because I'm the data guy, and whenever you and I talk, you always talk about being the data guy. So I'm really excited to actually talk about how data can be to the advantage of the small operator in the industry.
There are about 100 topics we could talk about, and
Oh, for
all of
sure.
them are important, and it's hard to pick the most important. But the one thing I can say about data, in my opinion, is the biggest missed opportunity.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure.
I think it's the area, and you and I could go back to the very first seminar we ever did,
Yeah.
and standing on that stage and asking how many owner operators and small carriers had good operational data, and the number was
Yeah.
so low. And
Yeah.
here we are, 25 years later, and the number's still way too low.
Yeah, I've got some questions about that as to why, so we can dive into that. And I remember that time, Kevin. I remember being amazed. I mean, I was kind of a newbie in the market, and here I'm listening to this guy that's an expert on the stage talk about this stuff, and it blew me away as well that and this was in 1999 for those that don't know the year that Kevin and I are referring to. We go back that far, but it just seems like that as much that has changed, there's little that has changed, which is and yet we live in an environment right now, KR, that is it's data first. It's everything is data first. I mean, you don't go buy a lawnmower without going and researching it on the internet and understanding all the different pieces about it. You use data, in a massive way, whether you really realize it or not. And certainly in transportation, the use of data and systems that manage the data has exploded in the last decade.
Hey, real quick, before we get
Yeah,
too deep into this, I want to make sure everything's working right. Is everybody seeing my screen?
I see it.
We see you, Kevin.
Okay. Lisa, I'm not sure why you're not seeing it then. All right. I just wanted to make sure because I
Just
was
got a
getting
panelist that said
messages to
yes.
share my
We got
screen.
Michael says he sees it.
Okay.
Trevor, John said give us a thumbs up. So it looks like we're doing pretty good.
Perfect. Okay.
All right.
All right. So I think you and I have both agreed, and we've agreed with years that,
Yeah.
and this isn't like some revelation. I mean,
No.
all business runs on data. It's becoming more and more important.
Right.
But the other thing that I will say is it's one of those things that you can skip, and too many people do. And
Yeah.
it's why we talk about it all the time. It's why we have an entire month this time dedicated to this one topic of data. And we're going to talk about some specific data points, but
Right.
um, again, I would call it the biggest missed opportunity for small carriers. The kind of data that they have access to now through a system like Truckstop, 20 years ago, what would a fleet paid for this?
Oh goodness. Uh, I would think millions of dollars.
Yeah,
A fleet would have paid millions, but
yeah.
to have access to an entire visibility, or visibility into an entire part of the entire freight system in the United States. And then, Kevin, I remember you talked about data. It was one of the reasons, why you said I really want you to come on the program and just talk about the actual data itself and just talk, give the audience, give the truckers out there, give the Let's Truck tribe, give them like a snapshot of what's going on right then. And so it's been just a joy to do that. but also, you realize that, once you start down that road, there's just so much data to talk about.
I have an answer on why it's not used enough at the
Yeah,
small
I was
end.
going to ask you that. Yeah.
Yeah. And this may be changing. The challenge with data in the small end of the market isn't that it's not available, it's not easily accessed. And then the first part of the data they should have that I talk about all the time is their own data,
Right.
their
Yep.
own numbers, so that then
Yep.
the market data makes sense. The problem is it's always required somebody to put that data together. And most people don't like numbers. Most people don't like spreadsheets or software or accounting. And certainly a lot of people who own trucks,
Mhm.
this is just not their favorite thing.
Yeah, I can understand it.
And we've struggled with that. How do you make it easier? You know, the accounting data specifically, we thought we made it as easy as possible. It still wasn't easy enough. One of the big topics I've been talking a lot about, so we might as well just throw it out now, is AI and all the
Yeah.
changes AI is
Oh,
going to make. And,
right.
and the one thing that I'm going to predict, we're not seeing it yet, but what AI is going to change soon is the need to physically do anything to have data available.
Right.
It can see where software is now moving to the point where there will be almost zero user input. And that's been our roadblock. The data the user needs to put in requires work, and it's not work they want to do.
Right.
And then we're stuck right there. Well, I can already see we're building some new software tools. A lot of people are, where the input kind of goes away. The
Right.
data that we would input already exists somewhere else. It's just never been easy to get into where we need it. And
Right.
I think that may be one of the biggest things AI is going to change.
Yeah, Kevin, I think about AI and I think about what technology did for the one truck, two truck operator inside of the U.S. freight transportation market. It really allowed them to have access to an entire system of freight in America, and it allowed them. And this is what gave me a lot of excitement. And I think AI gives me even more, Kevin. I love your opinion on this because having access to that data as a small player, when it used to be you had to have, $100 million to have access to something like this, it allows you to compete in the broad market. A one truck
Yeah.
operator can compete with a 100 truck owner, a 100 truck operation. So I think about that. So what would you say about AI and its ability to sort of maybe turbocharge that ability to compete?
So the thing that the small operator tends to miss out on is all
Right.
these technological advancements always benefit them more, and yet that's why I call this the biggest missed
Right.
opportunity.
Right.
AI is going to do it again.
Yep.
AI brings so much more data to the small operator that the big operators have kind of had access to. And now it's so cheap. This is their advantage. And we're not quite there yet.
Yeah.
Most of the offerings I'm seeing in the freight market right now around AI are kind of clumsy and ugly,
Oh,
and
very. Yeah. They're just in the beginning, nascent
we're at the
stages. Yep.
which is this is why we should be talking about this
Right.
now,
Yeah.
because the farther out front you are on this, the bigger the advantage is going to be.
Yeah, for sure there is. Absolutely. Hey,
Now,
one more thing. Go ahead.
yeah,
Sorry.
now, but go ahead because I'm going to jump into these bullet points.
Yeah, let's do that. So, one thing I also want to make sure that we talk about too in data from a data standpoint, and you don't think it's data, but it is. When ELDs became mandated in 2018, you got a different set of data. Now
Yes.
you have data that you can actually, believe it or not, I know it was seen as a negative, and there's and I wouldn't necessarily disagree with the old Big Brother aspect of things. However, when you can measure things, your time can be then looked at as a benefit to yourself. In other words, when you're working with your freight providers in the market. So I want to make sure I've kind of plant that in your head, KR, to talk a little bit about that. But let's get to the bullet points.
Yeah, so I really like this first bullet point, gain clarity on how data
Right.
improves decision making.
Right.
So before we talk about the data, let's talk about why it's important, what we would do
Right.
with it. But, for the last 20 years, longer, 20 years on the air, I have spent thousands and thousands of hours answering questions
Yeah.
primarily from owner operators and small carriers. And
Mhm.
if you're asking me a question, isn't it almost always because you have a decision to make? If we
Oh, for
think
sure it
about
is.
that,
Yeah.
you're asking a question, and in a sense, they're asking me many times to help them make a decision. And the biggest struggle I have is it's hard to make a decision when you don't have information. And this is why small business owners struggle with decisions, thinking they're really hard to make.
Right.
And it's hard because they have no data to base their decision making on.
Right.
Many times, here's a good one. People will come to me and say, it feels to me like my truck is just nickel and diming me to death on maintenance. And when does it make sense to go take on a big truck payment, higher insurance? When will it offset, the maintenance cost I have now? And then we could throw in fuel mileage and all those other facts. And how do you even begin to answer that question until you have all that data?
Right.
And so they'll call me and ask me to help them make it. Well, I can't make it any better than they can if I don't have the data.
Right.
And that's usually the piece we're missing. So the point I'm trying to get across is these decisions seem hard because you don't have the proper data to make the decision. Once you have the data, then I can show you how easy most of this is.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no doubt. Getting a grip around your data is so important because we live in a data world now. Whether we like it or not, and I realize trucking is still you got to pick it up and deliver it, and that's a manual process. But there's a giant amount of data that goes around that, and the better control you have on it, the better understanding. And let me not say control, the better understanding you have of your data, the more it can benefit you. So, which other bullet point stands out to you here, Kevin?
So you know me that there's two ways to improve business is all about the profit on the bottom line. I mean
Right.
that's what this all comes down to.
Right.
Everything we do should be designed to increase that number on the bottom line. And
Right.
in reality, there's only two ways to do that. You increase revenue, you decrease expenses.
Right.
I am a huge believer in you spend about 80% of your time reducing expenses and about 20% on revenue
Right.
because we have far more control over expenses. So the idea of using data to reduce expenses has been what I've tried to get across for, 30 plus years now.
Yeah, no doubt. And that kind of leads us in our next slide, Kevin. What are the key metrics for profitability? So you were talking about using that data to really understand your business, whether you're trying to cut the cost, which is I'd love for you to emphasize a little bit more on this. What are things you can control and what are things you can't control? Data can help you on both sides, but you talked about the control and that first bullet point on the key metrics for profitability, which is to track that cost per mile to understand profitability.
Well, one of the attitudes that I see is that this almost entitlement mentality that I bought a
Right.
truck, I went
Yeah.
into business, I'm entitled to a profit. And then it always comes down, and you know this because you hear this all the time. It always comes down to the rate. Somehow
Yeah, well, it sure does.
somebody's ripping me off. The shipper, the broker, the load board, somebody's taking too much of the rate and I can't make a profit. Well, that is a completely backwards way of looking at this. The rate is what the rate is for the most part. So we have far more control over our expenses, and yet 99% of the focus I see in this industry on the small end is on the revenue side.
Right.
Everybody talks about the rate. Well, why is the rate this low? Well, the rate needs to be this much. Well, I'm not going to pull anything below this rate. It's it's nonstop rate, rate, rate. What about your fuel cost? What about your maintenance cost? What about
Right.
your fixed cost versus variable cost? Then the attitude seems to be, well, you just do that all that cost cutting so you can haul cheap freight. Well, no, I'm hauling at the market. We'll get to the
Right.
point where we use data the best way we possibly can to get the best rate available, but the rate's determined by the market.
Yeah, well, for sure it is. Yeah, and I think that's something important for everyone to know is that it does. But I want to go back to a point that you just made about cheap freight, and I understand the phrase, I get it, but I think the thing you need to look at is what's your efficiency cost per mile. And
Yeah.
I know truckers that can run $1.50 freight, $1.40 freight, and make money on it because their operating ratio is 85 cents a mile. So it comes back to what is it costing you to run that mile? What is it costing you to run your operation? Because somebody's cheap freight is actually somebody's profitable freight. So I think we have to be very careful about, defining certain things because different operations operate differently.
And we are in an industry that is more complicated than most in a lot of ways
Right.
because the supply and demand is much harder to understand in trucking than it is in most industries, primarily because the supply is on the move all the time and we never know
Yeah.
what supply is going to be where. And by
Yep.
supply, for people who don't know, we're talking about trucks, trailers, and drivers.
Right.
The
Absolutely.
ability to move a load of freight is the supply side of this. The demand is how much freight there is there to
Correct.
move.
Correct.
And it is harder to understand because our supply is always moving.
Right. It is. Absolutely it is. So Kevin, on bullet points 2 and 3, you've got monitor revenue per load and then keep an eye on deadhead miles. Why, and you and I have talked about this and I've heard you talk about it 100 times, 1,000 times. Why are those the two bullet points that you think are the most that stand out?
As much as I don't want people to focus on revenue, it is the starting point of the calculation.
Right.
A profit and loss, basically, if we did a profit and loss per load, revenue goes at the top. Under that, we start to list all of our expenses and we get down to the bottom line. That's why we use that
Right.
phrase all the time. The important number, what's left. And to me, if we even want to have the argument about cheap freight, we should only be talking about what's left,
Right.
never really about the revenue, but it is where we start.
Right.
And if we have reasonably good record keeping, we can start to identify our best opportunities, our best customers, our best lanes, the best type of freight we pull. And once we do that, revenue can become even less important. It's not something we have to keep going back to. If
Right.
we can identify our best customers and our best loads and we focus on those, that might be all we have to do on the revenue side.
Yeah. Well, no doubt. I
Deadhead
love it.
miles,
Go ahead.
if
Yes, sir.
we, as much as I hate the phrase cheap freight, can you think of freight any cheaper than an empty trailer?
Yeah, I'm gonna have a tough time thinking of that one. Probably
Yeah,
not. Yeah.
that is the ultimate cheap
Yeah.
freight. And
Yeah, it
and
sure is.
yet people are willing to, just on principle alone,
Right.
they're willing to move empty because they don't think the rate was high enough. Although
Right.
they think zero seems to be just fine.
Right. Yeah, and those fixed expenses are there whether you got freight on the truck or not. Absolutely. So one of the things I'd love before we move to the next slide, there's a great phrase by Peter Drucker. I know you know who Peter Drucker is, one of the greatest business managers and advisors ever in the world. He
Yeah.
said, "What gets measured gets done." And so you're always talking about knowing your numbers, and that's the same phrase, which is how are you measuring? And so, because if you really want to run your operation, you want to enjoy being a trucker, you got to measure it. So I love that phrase, what gets measured gets done, because you're always talking about knowing your numbers and why that's important.
Yeah, and our action item here is just pick one. Just
Right.
start
Right.
tracking
Yep.
something and move on from there. I tell people the first expense you should track in this business is fuel mileage.
No, for sure. Hmm.
Track it as fuel mileage, track it as a cost per mile.
Right.
It's your biggest expense. It's the one you have the most control over. It's something we can track on every single tank full. It's not something we have to wait a month to start seeing results on. You
Right.
start tracking your fuel mileage per tank right now, you'll start to see results. There's another interesting thing, and it kind of goes along with Peter Drucker saying
Hmm.
what gets, and I've also seen as what gets measured gets improved,
That's
because
right. That's correct.
ultimately what we're
That's another
trying
way
to
to put it.
do.
Yep.
I have told people, and I know this always sounds weird, and I'm usually using it in the sense of go use our fuel gauges software to track your
Uh-huh.
fuel mileage. And I will tell people in the first 30 days, all I want you to do is track it.
Yeah,
Don't
that's right.
try to improve it, just track it. And you know what happens at the end of 30 days?
What's that? What happens?
Somehow it improves.
That's
And
right.
I'll say, wait a minute, why did your
Yeah.
fuel mileage improve? I specifically told you not to change anything.
Right.
And I'll say it kind of tongue in cheek.
Right.
Just the fact that you started measuring it, it starts to improve. And you don't even, sometimes you're not able to identify why.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. So I think about that. I learned from a great guy named Pettis Randall. We'll talk about the same thing. What gets measured gets improved. And so we measured things all the time, and I learned to do that. Now it's still hard for me. I mean, I got a personality that wants just to go for the big idea all the time. But I
Me
can tell you
too.
in my life, and I know you and I are always talking about that. In my life, the things that I've really put down on paper and just tracked. I can't help but improve them because I'm seeing them every single day. And that's a little sort of a pro tip for everybody out at the tribe is if you'll put something in front of you every single day, you can't help but pay attention to it and improve it. So Kevin,
Yeah.
let's go to the next slide on how got all this data, all this opportunity in the marketplace, and every time that truck's moving, you're spinning up data for your operation. How do you leverage technology for tracking this data and then implementing it?
The biggest challenge, and this is about to get worse,
Right.
and I can fall into this trap. I have to fight against it all the time.
Hmm.
The trap isn't that there aren't enough good tools for tracking. The trap is that
Yeah.
there's too many.
Right. Yeah.
And and one of the challenges of technology that I struggle with is I'll start a system. Let's say I find a good goal tracking piece of
Right.
software website. And you got to learn it. There's always a learning curve. The more data you get in, the more
Hmm.
valuable it becomes. And then I'll get distracted by another goal tracking software and I'll say, oh, look, this has two more features that this one doesn't.
Absolutely.
So you jump to that one and you put all that work in it again to learn it and get your data in. And just as it's starting to work, somebody comes out with another piece of software that's even
Right.
better. And you have to at some point say, look, it doesn't mean I have to use the first thing I ever look at, but I
Right.
should take some time, study a couple different options, and then pick one and stick with it until there's a clear reason not to.
Yeah.
The warning I would have right now, I'm not sure if people are aware of what AI has done in computer programming.
Oh,
Um,
it's done a lot.
it is there is software out already to write code that can write code faster than 25 human beings.
Wow. That's impressive.
And good code, solid code. Software is about to become dirt cheap and it will be everywhere and it will do things we never thought software would do.
Hmm.
And it's because of the AI coding tools. The downside to that is software is going to be everywhere and it's going to be dirt cheap.
Right.
And a lot of it's going to be garbage.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's true.
So this challenge of finding the right tools and sticking with them is going to
Yeah.
get even more important. And
Well,
then I would
yeah.
say don't, especially for our market, what we're talking about, don't overcomplicate this.
Right.
This we don't need 100 tools. We don't need 15. A couple of good tools, and it's why I like our partnership. Truckstop has the market data. We have the tools to help them get their operational data, and that's
Yeah.
really as complicated as this should be. Use your
Yeah.
operational data, match it to the market data to find your best
Mhm.
customers and your best loads, and get back to what you do best, which is move freight, not stare at numbers.
Yeah. Amen to that. So I put a couple points down on like the great thing about technology in today's market or today's world that we all live in, it's right at your fingertips. But I will say this, and to Kevin's point, don't overbuy it. In other words, don't buy something that looks super great and all the bells and whistles, but you're not going to utilize it. And number two, and this is where all technology has a challenge for all of us, is that we'll buy a piece of technology and then we'll use it for the one thing that we really, really, really needed it for. And yet there's four or five other things that could dramatically help our operation or our efficiency. And we don't really ever take the time to learn how to use it within the tool. And why do I say that? It's because I see it all the time. The second bullet point here is use the load board and route optimization tools for planning. Most owner operator look, and you guys are the kings of the road. Guys and girls are kings of the road. Absolutely. You know your business. Absolutely. However, there's always more efficiency that you can gain because, and I know this because most of the owner operators don't use all the other tools. And yet they're right there at their fingertips. You've paid for them with a subscription to the load board. So why not you learn how to utilize them? Because it allows you to choose better freight, more better freight to fit the situation that you're in at that time. And so I just think about that Kevin, where they're not using that technology to all of their advantage.
So I'm going to take a little bit of time on this one.
Okay. Good.
because there's a lot to unpack here. And I
Yeah.
just had a couple great examples of this, and I can tie it into what we do at Let's Truck, what you guys do at Truckstop. So I was in a meeting with a company that has a lot of different services, and one of the principals made a statement. He said, "We got really good at the must-haves."
Yeah. There you go.
And I thought, oh, that's brilliant. Here's what I
Yeah.
mean by that. So I'll use our software first and the services that I've offered over the years. I really started with taxes and accounting.
Right.
Those are two different things. Accounting is keeping track of your numbers. Sure, you need to do some accounting to do your taxes, but I look at it as accounting as a way to do your numbers to improve your business, track it, measure it,
Right.
improve.
Right.
That's not required. That's not a must have. We know it. I mean, people operate businesses for 20 years and don't do hardly any accounting, if any at all. Taxes, on the other hand, are a must have.
Yep.
You have to file a tax return every year. Well, I made more business doing tax or more money doing tax returns than almost any other business I've ever had.
Oh,
And
wow.
yet I keep getting out of it because it's not a very satisfactory business for me because nobody's ever happy with your tax return, no matter how good you do it. So it's never, but it's easy to make money because it's a must have. They have
Right.
to do the tax return. They
Right.
don't have to do the accounting. And yet that's where I've always wanted them to focus.
Right.
From Truckstop, we can look at the load board itself in the search kind of as a must have. They
Right.
have to have freight.
Yep.
So they sign up, they use the load board over and over and over and over. They're missing the most powerful tools because they're not must-haves.
Right. Well, that's a very good way to put it. I mean, when you look at rates and broker evaluations and the route planning aspect, freight densities in a certain marketplace to know how much, how many loads are in where you're picking up and how many loads are where you're dropping off. So you can really do what fundamentally you really want to do, which is negotiate well. So
You,
absolutely.
you know something else, and I probably shouldn't give this secret away, but in a
Please do.
sense, it, Truck Stop gives you all the tools you need, and if you use them properly, you'll need Truck Stop a lot less.
Well,
Don't you hate to
no,
say that?
hey, no, well, yeah, no, I think that's a fair thing to say. Look, the most important thing you want from any supplier to you, whether whoever it is, they need to be for the success of your business. And so it is a giant marketplace. And what you and I have talked about is build your business where you can have those great relationships with basically 3 to 5 suppliers of freight to you, and then use the load board to fill in for everything else. Because we want the best success for your business. And if somebody doesn't, then they probably don't have your best interest in mind. Hey, Kevin, let's transition on to the next slide, which is something super important. It's about data as well, believe it or not. Okay, so I got in this market 13 years ago, and it seemed like that there was a big shift in the freight marketplace where t technology tools were becoming a day-to-day thing that were coming into the marketplace to create better opportunity for the marketplace out there. But everyone was so in just curious and excited about these new tools coming into the market, they forgot about one of the most important things, and that's cybersecurity on your business. In other words, it's like we built the house and forgot to put the door on it. So
Yeah,
so I think
yeah.
about cybersecurity, and so this is a big part of protecting your data, which is your business, right? So let's talk a little bit about cybersecurity and what's your point of view on it.
You might be surprised by this one.
Maybe I will. I'm often surprised by you.
Yeah, so I almost well, no, I take the approach on this one. I want my software providers to handle this for me. I don't want to have to
Well,
become a
fair.
security
Yeah.
expert. I don't want
Yeah.
to have to try to figure out the latest way somebody's going to steal my data from me. I don't want to have long, complicated password strings and different passwords everywhere. I want somebody to build software that take this pressure off me.
Right.
That's my whole take on this. So I'm
Yeah,
not sure
and I
that,
agree with you.
yeah, yeah, I don't think this, I don't want this to be my responsibility.
Yeah, and 100%, whatever platform you're using, wherever you want to ask them a few questions. You want to ask them what's their security protocols. What do they consider success? Do they? And I'm going to say a couple things right now, and it's not the most convenient thing in the market right now because it's a little bit of an interruption and a pain in the butt. if somebody doesn't have multi-factor authentication, in other words, they ask you for two pieces of identity for you just to authenticate onto the system, for you to log in, basically, then you're exposed. Number two, if they don't have identity verification, but in other words, you're going to verify who you are. I realize that's another level of headache. I realize that. However, it's another protection for the user of the product. And I promise you, if you'll have just those two things, you'll knock out most all of the exposure you're going to have in using any technology platform. But Kevin, kind of what my other thing is that there's also pieces of just basic monitoring on the systems that you're using. In other words, have you had any exposure? And you can get those for really inexpensive and they're easy to put on your system. So I'm just thinking about that. I agree with you. The systems you use need to have almost bank level security, because if not, then you're exposed. But also, I think that there's a little bit of personal responsibility in this, that you want to buy at least some just front end, just evaluation security or technology security that allows you to say, okay, well, there was potentially somebody that you exposed yourself to. So I think that's important as well.
I think the bigger picture here for me in our market and what we do,
Yeah,
um, I don't want to get too bogged down into logins and all that. Like I said, I
right,
want my provider to handle most of that for me. What we're really concerned about in this market is freight fraud, right? I mean,
right.
that
Sure it
falls
is.
under
Yep, yep,
cybersecurity.
yep.
But this idea of freight being stolen, identities being stolen, brokers
Yep.
not who they say they are, carriers not who they say they are, that is a huge issue in the industry right now,
Right.
right?
Right. It is.
Probably maybe one of the biggest, right?
It's the biggest right now because he can work your butt off and then get your revenue stolen out from underneath you. So absolutely, it's the biggest thing in the market.
Here's my take on this. We can simplify this a lot. Follow
I
the
know where
advice
you're
you
going.
and I have been giving for about 25 years, and this issue
Absolutely.
just goes away.
Absolutely. Yeah, it does.
Now, big carriers, medium-sized carriers, big and medium-sized brokers, they don't have that luxury.
Right.
They have got to deal with this. They've got to spend lots of money on this.
Right.
This is where very small companies have an operational advantage, a big one.
I agree.
You can almost forget about this issue if you build good relationships and move freight the way we've talked about.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And I would say absolutely that should be your first step, is to create those trusted relationships where you know if something is a little off, because that's not the way in which my freight supplier it works with me normally. So you'll know it very quickly. I'd say the other thing is that if you have if you have any sense that there's an issue, make sure that you're doing that extra step, that extra piece of data check and those sort of things,
Yeah.
because really your business is your business. If a problem happens, I realize that nobody likes to get anything taken from them, and I would never want that. But in the end, we're all responsible for our businesses, and we need to take measures that protect us, no doubt, within this. So,
Here's
yeah, go
here's
for it.
something else we both agree on before we move on.
Yeah,
You and I have talked about this a lot. I love technology. I'm usually
yeah,
one of the first users. I'm willing to take a risk on things, try things, test things, but I
mhm.
have been really adamant about the fact that technology should enhance our
Oh,
relationships,
yes,
never
100%.
replace them.
Yep,
And
yep,
this goes to the security and freight fraud and all of that.
yeah.
It's fine that I can use messaging apps and tracking and whatever to communicate with my customers, but it should never be the only way I'm communicating with them. We
No,
should
not at
still be
all.
talking to each other. We should have a human connection. And if you look at almost every way that this fraud occurs, it's almost always digital and
Oh,
electronic.
absolutely it is. Yeah, absolutely. Because it's personless, and you can pretend to be somebody else. So
Yeah.
absolutely, I agree with you. Yep, yep. Focus on where your most strength is, which is into the relationship. So let's transition into the last slide, Kevin. Don't forget, put your questions in there. Lisa just put something in there. Get your questions in there. We're excited about answering as many as we can. We'll run it till the end of the hour. So let's turn insights into action, Kevin. And like what are the top things, and there's some bullet points here. I'd love for you to talk to those. What are some of the top things where you're look there? We can talk about this all day long. As my dad used to say, we're done talking about it. Let's get to doing it. So
Yeah.
my dad, just for the like the tribe, my dad was 6'5" and an ex-professional football player. So when he spoke to you, you listened. Okay,
Yeah.
he said, "All right, what are we gonna do about it?" So what are we doing about turning insights into action?
The first thing, and I like this first bullet point, I want to clarify something. Set up regular check-ins to review key
Right.
metrics and adjust as needed. What
Right.
we're talking about is looking at the data. That's what we're talking about here. Key metrics are
Yeah.
just data, your fuel
Yeah.
mileage, your
Yeah.
fuel cost per mile, your net revenue per mile, whatever key metrics we're going to look at, they should be simple. And here's the good news about this.
Right.
With our market, regular check-in, you know how often that was for me with my trucks at the end?
How often?
Every 3 months.
Oh, wow.
I did my operation was so tight. Everything worked the way it was supposed to work because I did the
Right.
hard work and put it all in.
Right.
There was no reason for me to look at my operational data any more often than about 3 months, about once a quarter. And at most, if I maybe was thinking about buying a new truck, I might look at it once a month. In the beginning, for a small carrier, once a month
Right.
is plenty. This
Oh, for
is
sure.
not something you've got to
Yeah.
be looking at every day. So
Right.
if you take the time up front, that's where the work is.
Right.
Putting in the system so that you have this data. But once you do that, this is not a big part of your business. I
Yeah.
mean, even with the much more complicated business today, I have, multiple revenue streams, a lot more going on,
Right.
far more complicated than my trucking operation was. I still, if I have to look at it once a week, there must be something going on.
Right. Yeah. Kevin, I think about what you just said about developing, getting the data put in the beginning. In other words, when you talked about like when you said, well, just track it for 30 days. And to me, I think about like what that does is it develops a baseline for you. So what's your
Yes.
baseline? Because if you've got a baseline, if you know, look, I want to average 8.5 miles per gallon, and all of a sudden, if you got a baseline on that and you drop down to 8, you're going to go, whoa, whoa, why was I at 8? Because you know
Yep.
8.5 is the baseline you want to go after. And the reason that that's important is because you'll know right away whether or not you're off. And so that's super important because I really like your third bullet point here, which is make data-driven decisions. And I know that sounds a little bit impersonal because I mean, trucking's got emotion in it. We love trucking. I mean, we're in this because we love what we do. But here's what data-driven means: take your emotion out of it. When you can
Yes.
look at the data, it takes like, oh well, I was hoping, I was thinking, I was like, just take all that out of it. And when you can look at the bottom line and go, well, why was I averaging 7.8 miles per gallon last week? I need to be at 8.5 because that's really where I put all my baseline in. And so it allows you to take the emotion out of it, which allows you to make a rational decision. So I absolutely love that one.
What was that line? There's no crying in baseball.
I believe there was. That's right.
Yeah, I kind of like to look at it as like there's no emotion in business.
Right. There's not.
There
Hard to say
is,
that. It's hard to say that. Yeah.
but we need to
Yeah.
minimize it. Human beings don't make good decisions when there's a lot of
Right.
emotion,
Right.
and business decisions should be far more logical than emotion.
Right.
Data is logical.
Yeah,
Everything
absolutely.
else is emotion.
Absolutely. So let's look at the right, make a comment on the take action, and then let's get to some questions, Kev.
All right.
It says write down one action you'll take this week based on data, like adjusting a route or monitoring cost per mile.
Yeah, so let's start with the easy one. Track your fuel mileage with pencil and
Right.
paper.
Right.
You
Right.
know, I was just talking about this on my show the other day. The onboard computers on the newer trucks
Right.
give you fuel mileage data. It is extremely accurate these days.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
It really, 10 years ago, it wasn't very accurate. 20 years ago, it was
Right.
horrible if you had it at all. Now it's extremely accurate. In a sense, I'm not happy about that. It, it,
Makes
it
it too easy.
It makes it too easy, and it's one more piece of data we won't understand because it's just there. We don't even know where it came from or how it got
Right.
there. The
Right.
best analogy is um, 25 years ago, how many phone numbers did you know by heart?
Oh my gosh, probably 100.
How many do you know now?
Maybe about 15, maybe 10, maybe
Yeah, I was
less.
going to say, I think I might know two,
I could,
mine
I
and
could,
Lisa's.
yeah,
That's
I could tell you my phone number from when I was in fourth grade.
me
Two
too.
two oh five 853 5207. So no
I'm
problem. That
calling
number doesn't exist anymore.
it.
Well, yeah, you're right about that. Yeah, the idea of like the resident thing in your mind.
So here's the lesson here. Um, there's going to be two groups like there is almost in everything anymore.
Yeah.
We're being split in so many ways. We are going to be split by the people who are going to ignore data more than
Hmm.
ever because
Hmm.
it's just there, it's everywhere. You didn't have to
Right.
do anything. Like I said, that's what I want. But on the other hand, 10 people then will ignore it. It doesn't have value. What do I
Right.
need to look at that for? Why do I
Right.
need to know a phone number? It's in my phone. The
Right.
people who will benefit from this will be the people who dig in and say, look,
Yep.
all this data has real value, but I have to use it. I have to understand it and I have to use it.
Right. Absolutely. Man, fantastic. All right. Well, let's let Nate come on, jump back in with us, and let's get to some questions and see how we can solve some individual problems.
All right, gentlemen, sounds good. Well, first off, I want some redemption here. So this first question is for His Royal Highness himself. Uh, Evan, Michael's asking, as a small fleet owner, where do you begin with putting the data together? I've been working on trying to get this together and currently working in QBO and tracking and inputting in a more detailed fashion, but I seem to run out of daylight often. So what is most important in data points?
So can he clarify small carrier, how many power units?
Yeah. Michael, if you're on here, if you can type that in for me. Six
He
units.
says six.
Six. So one of the challenges in accounting, and this is about to get a whole lot better with software that'll be coming out here soon. We'll be releasing some of it soon, is the data entry is going to go away. Six trucks,
Right.
that data entry right now is what's sucking up all the time. And unfortunately, QuickBooks is a horrible option for this.
Oh,
For
is it really?
our
Oh, wow.
industry,
Yeah.
QuickBooks cannot track cost per mile. Can't do it. The process, if you're using QuickBooks, is that you have to write a spreadsheet to track cost per mile. Then you have to understand how to connect your QuickBooks data to a
Huh.
spreadsheet, and then you have to understand how to sync it properly. The average user isn't going to do it. This is a lot of work on six trucks. My advice here, until we get the next generation of software, which I think will be within the next 12 months, is you should, at six trucks, you got to start looking at a data entry person. And you may need to pay somebody to do this. Usually it's not going to be the owner. It's probably not going to be Michael. Sounds like he's already frustrated with it. You've got to now pay somebody to turn that raw data into a one-page report the way we have in our software that you as the owner just look at and evaluate. You'll get so lost in the data entry, you'll never get to the power of the data. Does that make
Huh.
sense?
Awesome.
Wow. All right. Next question, Nate.
You got it. Jonathan, thanks for your question. What data can be used and how can we use it to find drivers with, and in quotes, drive?
Wait, read that again. How can we use it to find drivers? I was going to answer that question, and then I got lost with the next part of it.
With I think just that extra oomph, that extra want to, that level up that you're looking for when you're acquiring a driver, trying to find one.
Mm.
So this brings up a topic that we could do an entire webinar on, maybe even an entire webinar series. Everybody wants a quick fix on finding drivers. This question is even being asked, okay, well, how would we use data to find drivers? Honestly, you're probably not going to.
Yeah. It's
Um,
gonna be difficult.
this is one of those things that's totally separate from what we're talking about here. And I get this question a lot, if I had a good answer on how to find really good qualified
Mhm.
drivers, I'd be retired by now. Brent, is there anybody in the industry that has an answer to that question? Seriously.
No, they don't. I mean, it's a shotgun effect. It's a surgical effect. It's a data. I mean, it's there's nobody. I mean, because I mean, what is quality? What's the what qualified or
Right.
quality
What would
driver
we
that you're looking
measure?
for? Yeah. What all would you measure? That's difficult.
And as a small carrier, I could tell you what we could measure:
Right.
miles without an accident, years of
Right.
experience, years
Right.
years without
Right.
complaints. But when you find that guy, what are you going to do to hire him? I mean, it's not like there's hundreds of them standing around looking for a job. If
Right.
they have the qualifications you want, they probably already have one of the better jobs in the industry.
For sure they do. Yeah.
That's the challenge. It's not
Yeah.
finding those guys. We could tell you what stuff to measure to find them. Then how are you going to hire them as a small carrier?
Yeah.
So people are very frustrated with that answer, but it's reality. Here's what I focus on. I can't focus on the pool of qualified drivers. They are what they are. I can't create them.
Right.
When I find them, I got to figure out a way to hire them. Yeah, and many times I won't be able to. So we'll go back to what we always talk about. Get
Right.
your bottom line as big as you can, and then you can afford to pay better qualified drivers.
Right. Yeah.
You got to stop wasting money everywhere else in your operation so you have as much money as possible to pay the best driver.
Yeah.
That's the bigger challenge, and that's where our focus should be. Because I and nobody, there are no answers to just easily finding qualified drivers.
Right. Hey, Kevin, I want to follow back up on Mike Lutz's question about, and you had answered. He had a couple other points in there. He said he's not over the road; he's mostly heavy haul, and then he said this is what happens. He's lost in the data entry. So I want to make sure was that part of the solution that you were answering?
Yeah, he's lost in the data entry, and he's going to stay lost in it as long as he keeps trying to do it himself.
Oh, okay, okay,
QuickBooks is fairly labor intensive with 6 trucks. There's a lot of data entry to be done. And unless you're just a numbers geek, and I kind of doubt that Michael is, you shouldn't be the one doing the data entry.
yeah,
You're going to have to pay somebody to set up good accounting and good reports, and then you just read and use the
right,
reports.
right, right. Yeah, fair enough. All right, Nate, what's our next question?
All right, Jim, thank you for your question. Any tips for part-time carriers who want to stay local a couple days a week?
Um, yeah, yes and no. There's so much more I need to know to that. Why are they a part-time carrier? Can we get a
Right.
quick answer to that?
Jim, you mind throwing that in the webinar chat for us?
Yeah.
I mean, because that's a pretty unusual
Says he
situation,
has says he
and
has another job. So,
that would be the bigger challenge is why are you trying to run a trucking company part-time when you have another job?
mhm.
Um, again, there's no easy answer to this. Most local work is not going to pay all that well. It's a supply and demand thing. Brent, what would you say after money? Because money's always number one on everybody's list. List of things that drivers want. After money, what's a big one?
Oh, I think they want flexibility with their time.
Home time,
Yeah, they want
right?
flexibility with their time. Sure. You know, whether it's home time or whether it's vacation time or whatever it is, it's just time.
Yeah,
They want most
yeah.
flexibility with their time. Right.
Almost everybody wants to be home more. Well,
Mhm.
there's only a certain amount of local freight. And if
Right.
more people want it, it comes down to supply and demand. When you look at most local markets, it's container, it's fuel hauling, it's aggregate,
Mhm.
and those things don't pay all that well.
No, I was going to say that as well, Kevin. It's a shorter haul, which means it's a lower cost haul. Now you could. There's a lot of people that make money, moving dray freight or moving local freight around, but it's a hustle business. And so I don't know if a part-time person can hustle enough to be able to really string enough of them together to be able to do it, unless you've just got a great shipper that you're working with or a great broker that you're working with that you've got just it's all super predictable where you've got the same route and it's the same milk run all the time for you.
And then if it's there, there's going to be an awful lot of competition
Oh,
for
there's
it,
going to be yeah, for sure there is.
which is
Yeah.
going to drive the price down. So I think the challenge here is it's a hyper competitive market,
Mhm.
and trying to
Yeah.
do it part time is even more difficult.
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. Let's go with Anthony. Thank you for your question. Hello, I own a truck parking lot, just the lot, no freight. Would love some example of key data points we should be keeping up with. Additionally, any useful software programs for managing renting spaces and or transactions?
Well, this is a little bit of a curveball here. I appreciate the curveball. I
Yep.
might have some experience with truck parking. Why don't you just let me get his number and I'll call him offline with that. to give them some advice on that. Certainly, there's I mean, obviously, I'm involved with the
So,
truck parking club as well, but so yeah, but happy to engage on that question.
yeah, that would require more digging into their cost structures. And I mean, you can throw almost any segment of trucking itself at me, and I know the numbers inside now. Truck parking is like a whole different world. I will make one comment though. I talked
Yeah,
about software radically changing here soon. I've already seen some examples of it. It kind of fits in with this.
right,
Um, if you have multiple Airbnb properties,
right,
there is software on the market that just recently hit the market. It was built because they were able to build it with AI. And one of the things that it does that's pretty new for this market, even if I have two or three properties, or one even, um, this software now for Airbnb type rentals or vacation rentals does dynamic pricing based on the market.
right.
So that's kind of a big deal. You know,
Yeah,
typically, if I own a couple Airbnbs and it's more of a side hustle, which it usually is, I'm just going to kind of look at, okay, what does everybody in my area sort of charge? You put a price on it, that's it. This is dynamic pricing based on past and future and what's going on at the moment,
right,
where you might have a property that if somebody books it today for this weekend, they're paying $150 a night, but well, this is a holiday weekend.
mhm,
You might get 250 a night,
right,
where the average person is not doing that kind of pricing on their own because it's outrageously difficult to try to do that.
right.
So in that parking, in a lot of things, we may start to see a lot more dynamic pricing based on real-time market data.
Yeah, I think that's probably down the road a little bit, KR, on this and the marketplace just being built. But yeah, certainly that'll be, I'm sure, part of the marketplace. So, Anthony, Nate gave me your phone number. I'll reach out to you and answer this question specifically. Absolutely. What's our next question, Nate?
Yeah, let's go to this one. How often should a carrier be reviewing their numbers, and what's the best way to stay consistent with it?
So really, if we go back to the small carrier when I had three
Yeah.
trucks and a pretty set, dedicated runs, things didn't change that much. I really only looked at my numbers once a quarter.
Yeah.
Once a month for a small carrier. Once you get used to your data, now you should be looking at your fuel mileage specifically all the time,
Hmm.
every tank. And the bigger reason there is not as much financial as it's a great indicator on maintenance issues.
Hmm.
Watching a fuel mileage number can tell us about a maintenance problem a lot earlier than not watching it. So that should be almost at every tank, at least a weekly review. Operational numbers, revenue per mile, cost per mile, net per mile, once a month is fine. And, use technology, put a reminder on your phone to be consistent. Pick a date or, and just put it on the calendar, put it on your phone so it reminds you, and then just be consistent. When the reminder pops up, just go do it. Um, Really, this should not be more than an hour a month.
Awesome.
Yeah. All right.
Uh,
Fantastic.
got a couple more here. What's one metric you think most carriers overlook but absolutely should not?
Oh, wow. Good one.
Fuel mileage on every tank.
Mm, mm.
One, because it is our biggest cost. The more you focus on it, the better
Right.
you'll get at improving it. Two, what I was just talking about, maintenance is also a very big cost. Maintenance not only affects the expense side, but maintenance could affect our revenue side, couldn't it, Brent?
Absolutely. Sure. Well, it can affect every side. Maintenance is the number one. A major mechanical failure is the number one reason that small trucking companies go out of business. So mechanical can be great and it can drown you. So you got to pay attention to it. Absolutely.
And one of the indicators, we have just one. We should do good daily inspections.
Right.
We should have good preventative maintenance programs. I'll give two. I'll give two ways to really get a handle on your maintenance issues before they become problems. One is to track fuel mileage and understand it and know
Right.
when there might be a maintenance issue. The other one is oil sampling.
Oh,
When
wow. Yeah. I mean, you talk a lot about that.
yeah.
All right. What are the biggest mistakes you see carriers make when it comes to interpreting or acting on their data?
Oh, wow. Great question. Yeah.
Well, this one's easy. Um, the biggest mistake they make, and the one we have to overcome, is they just don't have data and they don't look at it. I honestly, the
How,
other thing I would say, the next big mistake is
Right.
paying somebody to create the data or setting up systems to creating the data and then ignoring it.
Right.
That's pretty common too. Then if we
Yep.
get to the third one, okay, they've got the data, they're actually looking at it. I don't know that I see many mistakes at that point.
Right. Well,
Get
Kevin,
those two
what would
down
you,
and
yeah.
there probably isn't much else to talk about.
Yeah. What would you say about being honest about the data? In other words, honest to yourself about the data.
Yeah, so one of the things that we see happen is people get into business and they didn't understand the numbers and the data and they overbought equipment. And their
Yeah.
equipment is just too expensive for their
Right.
operation.
Right.
And nobody wants to face up to that and say, I might have to get rid of this truck and go backwards.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, I think that's super important. I mean, look, the best place to find the truth is in the mirror. And so just look at it, be honest with yourself about where you are, because as soon as you're honest with yourself about where you are, you can take that next step about improving your situation. It's true in life, it's true in business, it's true in all parts of what we do. All right,
Yep.
Nate, you got another question?
Yeah, I got one more here. With
All
so
right.
many tools out there, how do you recommend a small carrier choosing the right technology without getting overwhelmed?
That is a big challenge.
Yeah. Yeah.
Keep it as simple as possible. You know, without making it a giant commercial. Our accounting software, Profit Gauges, is about as simple as it's going to get. Our next version is going to make it even more simple. Um, Brent, Truckstop
Yeah.
has a ton of data tools, but
Yeah.
one way to keep it simple is use all the tools available in the platforms you already have,
Yeah.
which is usually where most people are missing out. So don't overcomplicate this by running out looking for a bunch of other stuff in the market. Um, Brent, it isn't, I'm sure there has to be somebody, a number they could call where somebody would walk through their account with them and help them learn all these tools.
Yeah. Well, Nate would know that. Nate, what's the best number someone can call for to get the service that they're wanting at Truckstop?
Yeah, you can. I'll put the link in here as well for Truckstop, but we have
Yeah.
our sales line. I'll also post that in here here pretty quick. But it's a 1-800 number. It'll be coming shortly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
again, the idea is, and I'll use Truckstep as a great example. There are so many tools there you aren't even aware you're
Right.
already paying
Yeah.
for it and you have
Yeah.
access to.
Yeah. To
Build
me,
out every tool you
yeah.
already have access to before you go looking for anything new.
Yeah. To me, Kevin, a couple of the big ones are certainly rates. You want to understand rates, but not just rates in general, because what you want to look at is you want to look at rates in the markets that you like to go to, or the rates in the markets that are actually above the regular status of any rate in a marketplace. In other words, where are the hot markets? Because that's
Well,
really,
and
yeah. Go ahead.
yeah, let me use one more piece here is that we touched on this a little bit. I'm still a big believer in build the relationships and a lot of this stuff becomes
Mhm.
easier. The
Yeah.
best tool I know of to go build those relationships is Truckstop.
Oh, well, yeah, because it gives you transparency of the information. You're able to really talk to the broker in the terms that they actually, it's their data. A lot of it's their data on there. So you're talking to them in
Right.
the terms on their data. Kevin, we're right at 1:59. I want to make sure we end on time and respect everybody's time out there. So, um, Nate, anything final thing on your end? I want to make sure we talk about the next two webinars that are coming up.
Yeah, let's take a look here. It's just some follow up from Mike or Michael. He says that his drivers love the KW and Pete's, but I made the most money with my freight shakers.
So you make money with the truck that you can get the best efficiency out of, no matter what it is.
Boy, we could do another whole webinar on the whole driver thing with
Well,
this. So
specking the truck. I know you talk a lot about specking the truck.
yeah, and ultimately, I'll just make a comment on this. I understand why the drivers want to drive the big
Sure,
classics and all
sure.
that, but ultimately, I think everybody would rather have a bigger paycheck. And if we can
Yeah.
get our drivers on board, and this is the advantage of a
Yeah.
small carrier, get them on board, get them to understand that if we all work towards building a better bottom line, we drive trucks that are efficient and safe, not flashy, that we could all benefit by taking home bigger paychecks.
Right. Amen. I hear you. All
Well,
right, Nate.
gentlemen, Brent, Kevin, thank you so much for your guys' time. Really appreciate it. Anyone has any additional questions, feel free to still post them in the chat. I'll get them to the powers that be, and we'll get those answered for you as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So don't forget we got another webinar coming up. This is a great series. This past week was what right now is using a data to your advantage, which is super important. Next, we've got how to choose profitable freight, and that's a little bit more difficult than you think it is. I'll tell you what, because a
Yes.
lot of people choose freight that's not profitable. So we'll talk a lot about that. Kevin's got a great principles on that, and then we'll close out with webinar number 6, which is brokers. It's not a bad word, all right? But it's basically how do you create the most value for your owner operator carrier operation by creating the best relationship with brokers. Beneficial relationships and partnerships are things that always pay off over the long time. Boy, Kevin and I certainly talk about that all the time, and we know it firsthand. So those are the next two things coming up. And Nate, you want to close us out?
Yeah, absolutely. Once again, thanks for Truckstop and Let's Truck for helping to put this on. Brent, thank you for your time. Your
Of
Royal
course.
Highness, Kevin, thanks again. And we'll see you in the next one.
All right.
I
Thanks,
love it.
everybody.
All right, thanks everybody. Keep on trucking.